Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in bountiful Bakersfield, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael. And today we are excited to have back on the show my father, Dr. George Schwimmer. You'll remember he's been on the show before, but via Zoom. And today we have him in our studio. He's come on and talked about spirit attachments and the Kennedy assassination. He has written numerous books. I think it's over like 20 some books on metaphysical topics, as well as politically. He's become an expert on the assassination of John F. Kennedy. But today we're going to focus more on healing. And so he's going to be talking about his own personal journey with healing trauma in the hopes that he can offer you some advice. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our broadcast. Really happy to have you all here on a special day, on a Sunday, which we don't usually do. So obviously there'll be no show this Tuesday. This is a special day and time. So not this Tuesday, but the one after will be our last show of the month. We will have our prediction show, which we postponed due to the fire situation in LA because our astrologer friends live in LA and they were, obviously dealing with a lot of chaos and trauma. Which makes the show important for them as well. So Marnie Olson and Caroline Marshall, our astrologers, will be here, as well as Carrie Jane, our numerologist. And we're going to go over what the stars and the numbers hold for 2025. And then we're into a new month, and we're going to have all kinds of great stuff coming up. So check our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SAXTH, all spelled out. And while you're there, if you can afford to, buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi. Helps us cover a little bit of our cost, and we do appreciate it. And don't forget, you can also get our book now on Amazon. If you search under books for Tarot Alchemy, a Kabbalah-inspired approach to reading the cards. And thank you to all you who have given us such great feedback on it. It was really great to write it, and it's really happy that it's being appreciated. So don't forget about that either. So again, with that, I'm going to kick it back to you, Krista. So take it away, Krista.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And welcome back to the show, Dad.
Good to be back on the show.
Nice to have you in person. So let's start at the beginning with your own personal journey and how you first really, I would say, deeply got interested in the process of healing from trauma.
Well, I want to start with some basics first, so that some of this makes sense. There's no such thing as solid matter, as we all know at this point. 99.9999% of your so-called physical body is empty space. Universe is made out of energy. So keep that in mind, because everything that I've learned is based on energy. Okay. Now, human beings, you have a physical body, which is made of energy, but you also have an energy body, which I'm sure some of your listeners are aware of. And this energy body has a bunch of vortices, which are called chakras. And some people feel that these chakras are transducers, which transmute energy from other dimensions. I don't know about that, but anyway, that's a theory. Now, what I want to stress is that you have these chakras, and everything you do and you experience are recorded in your chakras. And so, for instance, if you have a trauma, let's say a relative died, that's going to be lodged probably in your first chakra, which is near the groin. And so most of the traumas that you get involved with, I discovered when I did past life therapy and also chakra healing and Reiki healing, they're located in the lower three chakras. These are your earth chakras. And this is where everything is recorded. then outside of yourself, you have this bubble of energy. And if you could see it, and some people can, not too many, but you can, you're surrounded by this egg-shaped bubble around you. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that if that bubble is injured or torn, you can have some real problems. Also, you have chakras in your hands and feet, and the chakras in your hands are used for healing. And I don't know what the chakras in your feet are used for. All I know is that if you have those chakras open, your energy will drain out. And I'm not talking about physical energy now. I'm talking about your life energy, whatever that is. I don't think anybody knows at this point yet. So keep these facts in mind when you listen to what else I have to say. The first experience I had with trauma and death, I was in the Army. I was about 24 years old, 1955. And I got a letter that a girl I had dated in my senior year in college was killed in an automobile accident. And that just totally traumatized me. It was bad enough being in the Army, but that news really tremendously upset me. That was the first real trauma that I experienced. I learned about, deaths of family members, but they were far away and I didn't remember them or anything. And so without thinking about it, I wrote a short story about it. And I guess that was my way of trying to heal what is a wound. Now, as I mentioned, you have this bubble of energy around you. And when you get that kind of a shock, it tears open the energy.
Is that bubble the same as an aura, or is that something different?
Well, the aura, yeah, it's pretty much the same. But auras you can see, and this bubble, incidentally, contracts and expands. If you're in a city, your energy body, this bubble, will contract, and almost to the right on top of your skin. If you're out in nature with your family, you have a good time, it'll expand sometimes 15 feet. I had a short course when I was living in New York on chakras and chakra healing. And during that course, I was able to feel the outer edges of people's energy fields. But what's important is that this energy field can be ripped, and any kinds of things can enter into it that are negative. For example, earthbound spirits could enter into it. So anyway, that was my first experience. The second one was with the death of John Kennedy. And I really can't express it. I don't think anybody who lived through that time can express it. But just to give you a small example, Krista here was 3.5, and she still remembers that day.
That's right, I do.
That weekend. And the reason she remembered that day was because I and Krista's mother sat in front of a TV set for 4 days straight. The trauma of that was just unreal. It was unbelievable. I can't really characterize it because there is no way of doing it. You have to have this experience. Now, one of the interesting things about all this, from a metaphysical point of view, is that I've read that a lot of people say we're on Earth to learn certain lessons. However, each of us is a little bit of God, so we already know everything there is to know. And so we're not down here to learn things, we're down here to experience things. And some of it you may find a little disturbing, But if you have to experience things, you have to experience both good and bad on this earth. And I remember a story I read from an account I read with Edward Casey. This young couple came to him, and they had lost their 3-year-old son. He died of some, I don't know, disease or another. And of course, they were all torn up. And so, Casey, I'm sure, sympathized with them. But then he said, well, you have to understand, however, that this was a very old soul that this child had. And this soul did not need to come back to earth. It came back as a favor to this couple to teach them the lesson of grief. And that really, opened my eyes as to what we're doing here. So there is that experience. And so sometimes, it's interesting that I'm sure all of you have seen on TV of some family that had some kind of a tragedy, for example, a murder of a child or whatever. And the parents will do something to try to leave a memory of their child. They'll start a scholarship, they'll start a foundation, and so on. There's this instinctive reaction of wanting to somehow carry on and maintain this child. And the third time was when my younger son, Krista's brother, was lost at sea at the age of 19. He was kayaking with Outward Bound in the Sea of Cortez. And again, I can't describe what it feels like. But I want to mention, though, some of the process here. When something like that happens to you, it's like somebody takes a 2x4 and slams it across your face. You go into shock. Something automatically, everything turns off. And I don't care what the trauma is. To a greater or lesser extent, you're going to have this total shock where everything turns off. And basically, for example, with the fires right now in Los Angeles, your life as you knew it is gone. And after David's death, I went to a number of psychics and mediums, and one of them, who I consulted, said, I see a gravestone. And he said, don't be afraid, you're not going to die. And he said, what this signifies is the symbol, and it means that the man who you were is now dead. And I believe that's true. That, when you get a trauma, the obvious thing with the LA fires is that they've lost their homes, they've lost their businesses, they've lost their community centers, they've lost everything. And your life is over. The life that you lived is over. You're still physically alive, but the life that you had is over. And you can't do anything about it, and you can't sort of tough it out, and you can't turn it off. And what I found after David's death was everything fell apart. I had been selling life insurance for a couple of years then, and I was making a decent, if not great, living. The year following David's death, my income dropped to half. And that's just one small example of what happened. But anyway, your life just simply ends when you have a trauma. You're a different person, and it's like being reborn as an adult. You've got a brand new life. for better or for worse. And as people, as I mentioned, people have a instinctual impulse to do something for or about the person. In the case of John Kennedy, it was too much of a trauma. I couldn't do anything about it. I mean, he was the president after all. He wasn't a member of my family. But in the case of David, ultimately, I wound up writing a book about the experiences, although it was years later. And then in the case of Kennedy, I wound up writing three books about the assassination. So obviously, looking back, my method for dealing with trauma was to write. And I think if anything that you can do in terms of the LA fires is find something positive that you can hook yourself to, or at the very least, something that you can focus on. And in my case with David, Outward Bound refused to give information about what happened, which was absolutely unconscionable. But anyway, they refused, and that just made me furious. And so I started doing research. And I went to the NC State University Library and I researched Outward Bound. And I found after a couple months of research that in the past, 13 people had died. This was not the first time that somebody had died. Well, anyway, that was, the beginning of my way of coping with it. I'm doing something. And with these LA fires, I've noticed on TV how a great many people are trying to help other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's something positive that is moving forward from what is basically a life-changing experience.
It does seem to be sometimes difficult navigating that time right after any kind of trauma, because as you said, it is true that your whole life has now died, and yet you don't know what the next stage is yet. You don't know what's going to, because of the shock and because you have already gone through a deep change without being able to necessarily process it all. So that idea that you mentioned about writing later, it could be that you needed time to process things on a deeper level.
Well, I think that's true. And I remember very clearly telling myself, I have to shut my emotions off. And the reason I did that was because everybody else was devastated. You and your brother Eric and your mother and my parents. And it went further than that. I expected David's friends to be upset, and they were, of course. What I didn't expect was how upset the parents of David's friends were. They seemed even more upset than David's friends were. And so the ripples go out. It's not just one person's experience. The ripples go out. I remember reading one time that the average person knows 600 people. That means, family, friends, associates, the grocer, the mailman, or whatever. Well, so if something happens, that ripples out to those 600 people. So it's not just, your own personal experience or your own personal grief and whatever. It goes out in waves. And you really need to, your way of healing is to find something really positive to do. I think in the case of the fires, it's very obvious. A lot of these people are going to rebuild. But also there's another side to all this. Some people will have a positive response, other people won't. They'll just sort of toss in the towel. And so, some people are not going to rebuild. They're just going to say, you know, I'm getting out of here. They don't want to deal with it. They want to start completely from scratch. But anyway, the point is that you only heal by doing things, and it does, and it can't be done, you know, in a short period of time. I found after David's death, it took me about 3 years to actually, you know, get my life back on track, so that you know, I wasn't affected by the various emotions and whatever involved there.
Well, it seems like maybe the slight difference between Kennedy's death. Well, actually, it's not slight. Uh, Maybe talk about the idea of the collective trauma, like the fires, versus your personal trauma, and what are the differences and what are the similarities? Because I think not only are the fires traumatic, but we're about to have a president who many people are terrified of because of his stance against them. That I've spoken to them, and they're already feeling re-traumatized, and so we're going to enter this period where especially certain groups are already showing the signs of trauma collectively.
Well, the positive sign though is that I watch a lot of MSNBC, and there have been several people who in the past have been associated with various protest groups, and they are saying very strongly, they said, you know, this is not a time to give up. This is a time to start fighting. And so again, that drops into the idea of I've got to do something. Something bad has happened, or in this case, something bad we think is going to happen, and we have to find something positive to counter this. And no,
Thank you.
you know, in terms of politics right now, as a danger, what you can't do is you can't stand to one side. And the same thing goes for any other kind of trauma. You can't just sit or stand to one side and hope it goes away. It's not going to go away. You know, you have to do something. And I'm hoping that people will actually. I think they will. I don't think Trump is going to get a free ride.
So what about people though that I mean, I know people sometimes that seem to have really never really healed from a trauma. Is there anything you can say to that in terms of it what's underlying that? Why is it that some people do seem more likely to and they can go through major traumas and still keep coming back, and then some people seem broken for the rest of their lives? What is that related to?
I don't really have an answer to that one. It's you know, we have free will on this planet. This is one of the main things about living on Earth. We have free will, and I think that people just don't want to face the pain of what they experience. You know, so I don't really know. You have to have this spark, and I don't know if it's something that you're born with or you develop yourself, but there has to be the spark of saying, okay, I've been knocked down, but I'm going to get up again. And I think many people are able to do that, and some, for whatever reason, are unable to do it. Now, this may tie in with what I started out with originally, and that is your energy field. That if your energy field is all ripped up, your life force is draining out of you. You don't have the energy to go and recover from whatever had happened to you. So you know, it's a pretty complex sort of thing.
I did have an experience with the energy field with the healer after David died, and I had a healing from David Gerald. I remember he was working on my aura, and he had said something similar that it was ripped, and as he put his hand, it was like quite far from my body. I burst into tears, and he had said there was a rip there, and I remember how in the world would I have known? I mean, because I felt fine until he wasn't even touching me. And I was quite young, and it made a huge impression on me. I didn't necessarily understand it all, but there does seem to be something really important about what you just said.
The other thing I just want to touch on, going back to the idea of energy and who we really are. We're all basically spirits, which are energy fields. I feel that what Einstein was talking about, I think it was called a united energy field. I think this is what spirits are. You know, we are made up of this complex of different energies, and each complex is totally unique, and that is its identity in the universe. And this is how psychics tune into people. They're tuning into the particular energy field of that person. And one of the things I want to get a little bit into death, because people have a very mistaken idea or don't have any idea whatsoever as to what's involved with death. And first of all, you want to die as much as possible consciously. And you don't want to hold on to anything. I don't remember what religion it is, but they say you have to leave everything physical behind. And it's interesting. I had one experience with that, because, you know, you get attached to things. And I remember we went to Ireland many years ago. And at that time, I had a brand new Mustang. And I loved that car. And I didn't have any way of keeping it if we went to Ireland. And I sold it. And I found I was really upset selling this car. So my attachment was not very good in terms of moving on in my journey through not only this life, but other lives. So one of the things, you know, you have to let go of if you are going to die, and we all are, you don't want to hold on to anything physical, and you don't want to hold on to agendas. One of the experiences I had always comes back to me. Very early on, I was doing spirit releasement and past life therapy, and this young woman came to me, and she had been diagnosed as having schizophrenia. And I asked her a little bit about it, and I wasn't trained to determine anything like that. But anyway, she started telling me stuff, including that she had used marijuana for a couple of years, and that some of her symptoms started when her mother died, and so on. And I immediately began to suspect that she had attached spirits. And so I made another appointment with her. I think we had 3 appointments altogether. And what I discovered was there were 4 spirits attached to her, and 3 of them had agendas. The mother wanted to control the girl because she said she doesn't know what she's doing. the father had raped a girl when she was 8, and he had a guilty conscience. And I don't recall exactly why he wanted to stay, but anyway, that was his background. The third one was a male spirit who wanted my client to kill herself so he could be with her when she died.
Oh,
So these are the kinds of agendas you don't want to carry with you, because they're gonna weigh you down,
right.
and you won't be able to move on. So again, everything is energy, and I don't know. Do you have any other questions right now?
Well, you were talking about the agendas of the dead people, and it seems like it hurts both the living and the dead, then, the whole idea of holding on to the agenda, because it's not just for your own benefit, but for other people's benefit that you would want to let it go. So that was interesting. I never really thought about that angle. There was a couple of things I wanted to talk about a little bit earlier. By the way, I mean, Buddhism really does emphasize letting go and not having attachment when you die. It's a huge, important thing for anyone following any kind of Buddhist path. But there was something I was, well, it'll come back to me what it was before. But so let's go back to the idea of some of the actual, I don't know, from your point of view, some of the techniques that have helped you with your healing emotionally and energetically, besides the idea of doing something positive, which I agree with. Because you've done a lot of that work and you've explored different tools. And are there some that you would, highly recommend for people that are especially not able to heal from their traumas?
Well, I think that I have to go back to the same thing. I get the path that I went on, and it was very odd in many ways. And people talk about being led by spirit, and I have personal experience. I was led by spirit because things would come into my life that I had never thought about. For example, I joined this organization called Spiritual Frontiers Fellowship, which was founded by Arthur Ford, who was the leading medium in the mid 20th century. Very famous guy. And I joined the organization, and they sent out a newsletter. I think it was once a month or once every 2 months. And I got this newsletter one day, and I'm reading it. And I still remember on the back of the front page, there's this little article about this big, maybe 2 inches. And it said there is a school that is teaching mediumship. And I sort of went, mediums aren't taught, they're born. And the odd thing was that I never threw that article out. I left that newsletter on my desk for months on end. And every once in a while I'd look at it and say, And finally I got so curious I sent for information. Well, make a long story short, I took the course. But if that hadn't come to me, I never would have, imagined that I could be trained as a psychic or as a medium. So things you have to be aware of things that come into your life. Anytime something comes into your life, you should not brush it aside, even if it seems weird. Just look at it and see, why is this in my life all of a sudden? I've been writing screenplays for the last 20 years. I never had the slightest interest in writing screenplays. I had some interest in writing stage plays, but basically I had worked as a theater director and a teacher for about 30 years. And I was living in Santa Barbara, and I was doing past life therapy, and I ran short of money, so I had to find a part-time job somewhere. So I found this telemarketing job of some kind. I can't remember exactly what we were selling. And there was a young guy sitting next to me, and he starts talking to me about how he is studying film at UCLA Extension. And I said, "Oh, really?" And I said, "Tell me about it." So he told me about everything he was doing, and I decided, "Oh, I'm going to study film." If he hadn't sat next to me, I never would have had the slightest interest in studying film.
Hmm.
So these things come into your life. People come into your life.
It's so true. I was going to say when David died, a whole new kind of people and groups came into my life easily. It was one of those things that happens a lot, and also people seem to find people very easily who've gone through similar traumas without even knowing they've gone through similar traumas. I just had a client tell me that she met someone that had gone through just a very similar trauma that she'd gone through recently, and she didn't know anything about him, but they, of course, sort of really could understand each other, and that seems to be part of the healing journey too.
The other thing that I want to mention, and that is spirit guides. Now, I know for some people this sounds airy-fairy, but the analogy that I've heard people use is think of a deep sea diver. You got this deep sea diver, not scuba, but the whole, suit and air tubes and so on and so forth. This diver is going down and down and down, and he goes down thousands of feet. Meanwhile, up on the boat, there's a dozen people that are taking care of everything that needs to be taken care of. They're taking care of the air, they're taking care of the communication, whatever. I don't know all the things that are involved. But you've got, at least half a dozen people, and maybe more, who are taking care of you. And for the most part, we're not aware of these spirit guides. I remember reading one time that every person has 5 guides that stay with them for a lifetime. But then when you need when you're in a specific situation, such as the presidency, you could have 100 guides because the president needs all kinds of information and help and so on. The reason I'm mentioning this, I never thought very much about it until, I don't know, it was about 4 or 5 years 4 or 5 years after David died. I was living in New York City, and I started becoming aware of my guides. And every once in a while, they would, quote, speak to me. And one experience that always sticks in my head, I had decided I was going to start doing metaphysical work. I'd received some training by that time. And so I quit my telemarketing job, and I set up as a past life therapist and psychic reader. And so I had to get clients. So I managed to get hold of a mailing list, 3,000 people. So I bought 3,000 stamped envelopes. I had printed up 3,000 flyers. I folded them up, put them in the envelope, licked the envelope shut, got a mailing permit, and sent off the 3,000 letters. I ultimately got 30 responses. And I was furious. I did not know at the time that this is a typical direct mail response, 1 to 1.5%. And I remember I was walking down the street one day, and I was muttering to myself, I put all this work into it, and I put all this money into it, and I sent out 3,000 letters, and I got 30 responses back. And in my head, I suddenly hear, "It's none of your business." And I sort of went, "What?" And I hear this voice again. It's none of your business. And I get just mad. I said, what do you mean it's none of my business? I spent all this money. I spent all this time. I sent out 3,000 letters and I only get 30 back. And you're telling me it's none of my business? And they say, it's none of your business. Your responsibility was to send out the information. What people did with the information is none of your business.
That's funny.
Yeah. So anyway, you have guys, and you may not be aware of them. They probably aren't, but they're there and they influence and bring things into your life. I mean that's what happened with me. I mean, so many things that odd things. I remember one very small thing. David had a mailbox at Duke University, and afterwards I got a change of address in case there was anything that was important that was mailed to him. And one day I get this envelope forwarded from his mailbox, and it was a advertisement, a letter with an advertisement in it about a new magazine. And on the upper left-hand corner, instead of the return address, is written, "Why death isn't so bad as you think it is."
That's humorous.
Yeah. So I sort of went, what? The other one that got me on the whole path of psychics and so on and so forth, another letter was sent to David and forwarded to me. And this letter said a new organization, I think it was called the Psychical Research Association, something like that, is being formed at Duke University, and you can join this organization. And through that organization, I got involved with everything I got afterwards. If I hadn't gotten that letter, I wouldn't have gotten involved in any of the things that I eventually gotten involved with. So these things come into your life, and you need to be aware of, why is this person in my life, or why is this particular event in my life? I understand that, with people with the LA fires, they're dealing with their immediate problems. But once your immediate problems are taken care of, you really need to go and say to yourself, well, why did this happen to me? One of the things you have to decide for yourself: are you living in a random universe that things just happen randomly by chance? Or are you living in a universe that is conscious and has a purpose in what it's doing? It's very difficult to conceive of an entity which we call God. But if you just posit that whatever this entity is, that it is incredibly intelligent and incredibly creative, then, okay, then how does your life relate to that? Why am I here specifically? Why am I specifically here? Now that gets into the whole idea of reincarnation, and that you are here to experience certain things, and you agree. One of the things that most people aren't aware of, you have a pre-birth committee, if you like, and this committee with you plans out your life that you're going to have on the planet. And they don't plan out every last detail. I remember I had a English professor in college, and we brought this question up one time, and he said, I believe half of it is free will and half of it is predetermined. And I agree with that. I feel that I was meant to meet your mother. I was meant to be born to my parents. I was meant to do, it sounds kind of bizarre, but if David hadn't died, I wouldn't have done anything that I've done in the last 40 years. I wouldn't have been a writer. I wouldn't have gotten involved with mediums and psychics and Reiki healing and so on and so forth. Simply, it was an interest. I was always interested in these metaphysical subjects, but I had a life to live, and I had 3 children to raise. I had a wife. I had a job. I wasn't going to get involved in any of that stuff. So, but as peculiar as it may seem, I feel that David's death was premeditated by him, that he had chosen, and it's interesting, a couple of the psychics told me, they said he knew he wasn't going to live a very long life. But the astrologer, Steve Forrest, I got a reading for David from him, and he said, well, David died young, but he packed an awful lot of life into those 19 years. So that's another thing that you can think about is, what's living all about? Why are you bothering, if you're a spirit? Why are you bothering to come here on this particular earth? So this is another thing to consider about why did something happen to you, and what are you going to do about it? In the case of David's death, what I did was I did all this research, and eventually I got an attorney, and eventually I wrote up a account of everything that had happened with Outward Bound in the last 20 years, and I sent it out to all the major news organizations, and I got no response. And finally, a reporter came by, and I told him, and he said, well, you're not going to get a response until you file a lawsuit, because all of these organizations are afraid of being sued themselves. The minute I filed the lawsuit, I got responses from the New York Times, the Washington Post, Newsweek, PBS station, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, we're back to what are you going to do with what happens to you? As I realize that some people may not like this idea, but of something, quote, bad happening to you in the course of your life, and that out of that comes something good. But my experience has been that, something good comes out of it, whether you want it or not, if you're willing to accept it. And I don't think I've ever had anything bad happen. Didn't ultimately turn out to be something very positive.
Well, it has been my experience too. And I'm not sure I completely agree with all of the philosophy of I like that idea of 50% chaos and 50% free will, because if we didn't have any free will, then why would we have to learn any, of this or make choices, because it'd be all predetermined. But the other thing I wanted to mention and ask you or talk about is sometimes when people go through any kind of trauma, they open up psychically unexpectedly. And they're not always prepared, and they don't always understand. Is there any advice if suddenly people, like we're hearing a voice, is that they may not be having a psychotic break? And even today, I think some people struggle with that.
I had when I first started doing spirit releasement, I ran across this book, and I can't remember the name offhand. I think it was The Presence of Madness in Psychosis, something like that. And it was by a psychiatrist in Southern California. And he worked at this institution where a lot of his patients were psychotic, schizophrenics. And so he started doing research, and he came to the conclusion that schizophrenia is spirit attachment, that all these people had spirits attached to
Hmm.
them. The guy who, from whose experience I learned to do spirit releasement, his doctoral dissertation had to do with women incarcerated, and he went and worked with them, and he found they all had spirits attached to them.
Hmm.
So we're living in a very, very strange universe, really, and a lot of this stuff, it sounds unbelievable, and in some cases it sounds fantastic, but there's see if I can remember the exact quote out of Sherlock Holmes. When you've eliminated the impossible, all that remains is the improbable, whatever that may be.
Yes, that is a good one.
Yeah. So I think the main thing I would want to get across to people is leave yourself open to having certain experiences. Going back to your statement about people opening up psychically, that's a very tough situation. If they're not aware of this phenomenon, and if they're not aware of people being psychic, they can get destroyed, and they can wind up in a mental institution.
Hmm.
So nobody should mess around with trying to do psychic things without a very experienced individual who themselves is psychic to show you the way, because it can really destroy you.
It's true. And it's like I said, I've just talked to people that it happened without them wanting it even, and they
Right.
just didn't know. At least today, there's a lot more public talk about psychic things compared to 50 years ago or something. You had to find it on your own a little more.
There was an organization, I can't remember the name now, but there was an organization that was formed just for this specific purpose, to help people who were opening up psychically and didn't realize what was happening to them. But if you just imagine of hearing voices night and day. I always was very successful getting rid of earthbound spirits, except 3 or 4 people that were classified as schizophrenic.
Hmm.
And each one had all these voices in their head. And some of them would say, the voice would say, "You're not going to get rid of me.
Hmm.
Or you're not going to get rid of us." And if the person, and the thing was that all of these people weren't cooperating with me. I remember 3 of them were young men whose parents brought them to me. They were about 20, 22 years old. They didn't want to have anything to do with me. They didn't want to have anything to do with getting rid of spirits.
Hmm.
I don't know if they believed in spirits or not, or if they believed they had spirits attached to them, but they were determined. They were determined. I couldn't do anything. Just didn't work. So, I don't know what else to say about that.
Yeah, that's good enough. I did want to mention to the audience that you did put out a recent book about your journey. Is it that The Search, A Mystic Journey? Isn't that your recent book of your own personal journey with with David and your healing? Is that right? You recently published that.
No, I haven't finished publishing. I'm preparing it for publication, but I haven't published it just yet.
And then I did also just want to mention your third Oswald and Kennedy book that you did recently publish, Oswald and Kennedy, The Whole Story.
Yeah. This, it took me 15 years, and this again, it was a journey. If you think that you're going to do something significant overnight, forget it. People talk about suddenly being discovered after 20 years of work. But it's peculiar that the whole Kennedy thing started when I had started writing a screenplay about an assassination, and I recalled Lee Harvey Oswald, and I was wondering, I said, maybe I can use something about what happened in my screenplay. So I bought this book, and it didn't make sense. There were all kinds of odd facts which absolutely did not fit together in any way, shape, or form. So I got another book, and I got another book, and I got about a half a dozen books, and I said, there's something really fishy going on here. I don't know what it is. And I kept on, reading books. And I remember I finally ran across a book which was, I think, entitled The Two Plots. And the writer stated that there were two plots. One was to kill Kennedy and one was to frame Oswald. And I suddenly went, oh, okay. And then I ran across this huge volume, 1,000 pages, small print, great big pages, so an awful lot of words, printed in China.
That's funny.
And it was called Harvey and Lee. And his thesis was that there were two people who were using the name Lee Harvey Oswald. And I sort of went, oh, okay. And so I read what he had to say, and then I ran across a lot of other stuff. And it finally became very clear, just to give you a little example. In one ID, Oswald is shown as having blue eyes. Mm-hmm. Another ID, he's got hazel eyes. And the third one, which just about made me laugh, was one eye was hazel and one eye was blue.
Oh, wow.
And I said, this is ridiculous. Then he was classified as being 5'11", 165 pounds. And the man who Ruby shot was 5'9" and weighed 135 pounds. Mm. So, I mean, you had all these crazy facts, but once you realize that there were two men using the name Lee Harvey Oswald, then suddenly it starts making sense. And so that was the beginning. And then the other part was the actual day of the murder. And I hadn't intended to write about that. I just wanted to find out who Oswald was and did he actually shoot President Kennedy. And so then I started going back to the books I'd read, and I suddenly discovered all kinds of facts which I had neglected because I was just looking for the Oswald information. I didn't really care about the rest of it. And just to mention a couple of things, and people won't believe me, but I counted 18 shots from witnesses' accounts.
Well, I think we're going to have people buy the book because we are running out of time. We have just a minute left. And thank you for coming on the show again, Dad. I think that gave people a lot of information about healing. And you can find all of his books on Amazon. He has ebooks and print books and even hardback. And it's under his name, George Schwimmer. And thank you all for tuning in. Join us next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together. And have a magical week.